Remember, we talked about the canary in the coal mine. And in the oceans, we see fish as the canary in the coal mine. And then we see the bigger fish as the coal. I don't think you're going to feed the entire world on anchovies, but swordfish, salmon, tuna, and your larger species that carry the weight and bulk on their bodies can be seen as the bread and butter of the ocean. But even pollock, a smaller fish, is netted by the megatons. But on land, your canary in the coal mine basically can be birds. But remember, extinctions always start at the bottom of the food chain and work their way up in a domino effect. We talked about the krill die-off in 2012 and 2013, possibly related to Fukushima. But we also talked about the insects being gone. And we just recently, this last couple of videos ago, we talked about when you turn on your lights at night, that there's no insects around your light. And, some of us, that's good. We get to go out at night, turn on the lights, and not be bombarded by moths, dragonflies, June bugs, beetles, gnats, and mosquitoes. But that's the bottom of the food chain for birds. And this article has just appeared, unprecedented. There we go. We see the word unprecedented. Birds mysteriously dropping dead across the Southwest. Potentially hundreds of thousands of migratory birds will not make their annual trip this winter after mysteriously a mass die-off that has alarmed biologists has occurred in the southwestern United States. Many different species of birds have been found dead in New Mexico in recent weeks, sparking concerns among researchers and New Mexico State University Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Conservation Ecology. It's just terrible, says NMSU biologist Martha Desmond. And she told CNN, the number is in the six figures. Just by looking at the scope of what we are seeing, we know this is a very large event. Hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of dead birds. And we're looking at the higher end of that. Desmond first noticed the die-offs last month at the White Sands Missile Range. The White Sands National Monument in the southern part of the state. She and her team have collected approximately 300 dead migratory birds since then. NMSU biologist Allison Salas said she sent some students around the campus on Monday to search for birds. They came back with several individuals of different species within just a few hours. The birds seem to be relatively good condition. And then, here we go. We get the contradiction started. The birds seem in relatively good condition, except they are extremely emaciated. And they use the word extremely emaciated. So how does an extremely emaciated bird appear to be in good condition? I have no idea. They have no fat reserves and barely any muscle mass, almost as if they had been flying until they just couldn't fly anymore. And we know that the extreme heat kills insects. And when a fly gets up on the window, it's usually dead by the end of the day. If you have a reflective barrier that reflects the radiation back out, that fly's dead within an hour or two. And the flies, the house flies, are crawling on the ground. They're easy to hit now. They're easy to capture. They're easy to kill. They're not springing out and getting away. They're just sitting there and letting you smash them with whatever you want to smash them with. So the flies, the house fly, I always thought of as the canary in the coal mine. For the last 5 years, I've been finding them crawling on the ground and not making it to full development. And of course, up on the windowsills, hundreds and hundreds of dead flies. The dead birds include various insect-eating birds such as sparrows, blackbirds, warblers, and bluebirds. I don't think I've ever seen anything so horrible in my life, Desmond told a local station, KRQE. A lot of these species, they're already in trouble and they're experiencing declines. And then to have this type of event occur on top of it is devastating. So you're looking at a complete collapse of species, is what she's really describing. And notice how she's already admitted they're already in trouble. Now, what would make migratory birds in trouble? Well, lack of food, extremely high solar irradiance. Also, HAARP, VLF, I mean, these birds are being assaulted in every way they turn and in every direction and from everything. HAARP, directed energy stuff, microwaves, radio waves, VLF, increased solar radiation, cosmic rays, and now a loss of their basic food platform. The birds have been seen acting strange before their deaths. According to experts at NMSU, many species that are typically perched in trees or bushes have been spotted hopping around on the ground. Yeah, they're scratching for food. The birds have often appeared dazed, and many have been hit by cars because they are too slow to get out of the way. Kind of like the flies. People have been reporting the birds look sleepy. They're just really lethargic. Trish Cutler, a biologist at the WSMR, told Las Cruces Sun News. One thing we're not seeing is our resident birds mixed in with these dead birds. We have resident birds that live here. Some of them migrate, some of them don't. But we're not getting birds like roadrunners or quail or doves dying. No, because they're not spending too much time flying. You know, when you fly, you do not have shade. And we have had no clouds over the southwest for months now. People in Colorado, Arizona, and Texas, and of course New Mexico, are seeing similar deaths. According to iNaturalist tracking project run by Desmond's team, they're encouraging people in the Southwest to report dead birds through the app so they can get a better picture of the problem. Desmond and her team still don't know why the birds are dying en masse. The state saw a cold snap last week, but that happened after Desmond's first noticed the die-off. So they started the die-off before the cold snap. And of course the cold snap isn't going to help when you have 90 degrees on one day and then it drops down to freezing 2 nights later. That's a huge extreme temperature swing. And birds migrate to get away from the freezing temps. And if you have no mass, no body mass, if you have muscle wasting and no fat reserves, how well are you going to survive a cold snap? And we've talked about those cold snaps that just show up. She says it might have something to do with the extremely dry conditions. Well, you know, some people were reporting UV index of 14. And of course, she talks about the wildfires raging in the West, in California, Oregon, and Washington. But we've had pretty significant fire activity before. So, you know, birds have sensitive respiratory systems. But it doesn't make them lose body weight. If you injure a bird's respiratory tract, they die within a week. And so they don't just keep flying and flying. They actually stop flying because of their inability to breathe correctly. Climate change is playing a role in this, Desmond told CNN. Listen to this, we lost 3 billion birds in the U.S. since 1970. That number is actually higher. It's more like 10 billion because What's happened in Alaska, in Vancouver, is just terrifying. All the seabirds. And so, she's talking about migratory birds mostly. And we've seen a tremendous decline in insects. Ding! So an event like this is terrifying to these populations, and it's devastating to see. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife says it's also looking into the issue. Not much is known about impacts of smoke and wildfires on birds, so the more data they collect, the better it is to understand. But this is again where we need to study. We need to study the problem. But the problem is these birds are acting just like the seals now. The seals are washing up emaciated. There's no more baby seals. The mothers are having to spend all their time in the ocean to try to feed and eat. And the top of the food chain is all that's left in the Pacific Ocean. And I know because I go fishing there, and people are thinking things are rosy because they're catching huge, very hungry fish. But, the top of the food chain is the last to go. And even with the seals, when I went fishing, I noticed that there were very few little seals, very little bait in the water, and we had these giant monster sea lions that were, look like elephant seals now, because they're feeding on the carrion. The carrion is dead tissue, dead animals, and when you have stuff that's down at 1,500, 2,000 foot depth, like squid, then all of a sudden they die and float up to the earth, float up to the surface and wash up on shore. It's feast or famine, and that's the way things are going now, and it will become for us as humans. But the climate change thing is very interesting because nobody talks about the ultraviolet, the extreme ultraviolet, the radiation, the record high increase in radioactive cosmic rays in the stratosphere. Nobody talks about that stuff. And some people have written in about those clouds that are seen over the poles of cyanide that are brought here by asteroids, meteors, meteoroids, and possibly even failed stars. But the cyanide clouds are very, very sensitive to heat. So basically, if you're getting out of the heat and you're moving north, 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 the cyanide clouds will become more of an issue. But if you live in a hot climate, the cyanide rapidly breaks down in any type of heat. Those are called noctilucent clouds, and we did a video on that quite a few years ago. We did actually a couple of videos. So you're witnessing it right before your eyes. Everywhere you look, you're seeing the mass extinction progressing. Turning it around is a matter of either compensating for the radiation, which means more shade, and the aluminum oxides that they're spraying in the air. We're not spraying more aluminum oxides than we did in 2013, 2014. In fact, some people are reporting less chemtrailing activity. But the real issue becomes, how contaminated is the water supply? And if so, usually contaminated water kills everything at once. I mean, you don't have birds hopping around looking for food in a daze. That's a bird that's exhausted, has been exposed to radiation, cannot find food. And that's a dying, withering, failing animal. What's even more weird is when they just drop out of the sky. Massive birds just found laying on the streets. That's bizarre. Now, I've been traveling down the roads the last couple of weeks. I try to travel because I don't like being home, frankly, and I'm keeping an eye on the vegetation, and almost all the vegetation in the Southwest, where they were experiencing shade temperatures of 115 degrees, that means your ground temperatures could be as high as 180, 185 degrees. If that's the case, then the asphalt is usually the hottest part of the ground that absorbs more heat than just sand and clay. And all along my journeys, I see endless supply of failed tires, rubber everywhere, in some places on the high-speed freeways. Every square meter of shoulder has rubber on it, and you can drive 100 miles, and every square meter has rubber on it. And, I mean, if you were to collect all of that, I can't imagine how big a pile you would end up with. So the heat on the asphalt is intense, and all along the road, any plant, shrub, or tree that is too close to the asphalt is dead, including heat-resistant cacti. The yucca are dead, and yucca is an important supply of food. The yucca flower and the yucca root is like a potato. So, and I has been preparing for these days for 10 years now, and I've been scoping out the yucca because the yucca roots are extremely edible and have a lot of minerals in them, and there's huge yucca forests all over the place, or yucca fields, or I don't know how you would describe it, but when I went, the south-facing yucca were half dead, and the ones closer to the street were completely dead, and I couldn't find a live yucca. So what I need to do now is go dig them up and see if the roots are even viable. But we're seeing a mass extinction, and our food supply is dwindling too. It's not just the birds, it's not just the fish and seals and mammals. It's also us. Our food is dwindling. And the question that begs to be asked is, when will it turn around? And that I do not have the answer to. I do think that if you buy mealworms at PetSmart, you can feed birds with them. You can feed lizards with them. Those mealworms aren't very expensive. They reproduce them indoors. There's an endless supply of mealworms. And you could actually feed your migratory birds those mealworms, and they're full of fat and protein. So, think about that. And if everybody out there that had a home had a can of mealworms, and bought one every week, they could literally put those out on bird feeders and really slow this extinction down. And until next time, be prepared, not scared.